Well, good morning, Severn. Run. How are you? Is everybody comfortable? Just want to make sure that. How was Christmas? Okay, some folks over here had a pretty good Christmas. I assume you got what you wanted. Over here, I'm concerned. So, how was Christmas? Okay, good stuff. How many of you got to spend some time with family for Christmas? How many of you are excited about that? Not so excited about that. They're gone. You can admit it now. You can say that you're not excited about it. So I got to spend some time with my family at Christmas, which is always fun. I've got a great family, but meanwhile, guess what? Still family, right? You understand that? Oh, come on. Don't sit out there and act like you got it all together and that everything's perfect. Yeah, so I got to spend some time. But every time I get to spend some time with my family, I'm reminded of the past, right? I mean, family reminds you of the past. You grew up with that family, and you start to kind of go through all of the memories. Some of those are good memories, and then some of those cause major PTSD. In my particular case, I was reminded of some things that my mom used to always, say to me. Anybody remember the stuff Mom used to say? Moms give pretty good advice, right? Folks, I'm not going to lie to you. This ain't going to work if we don't talk. We're trying to have a conversation here. I don't know if you thought you were showing up to see somebody preach this morning, but that's not the case. We're trying to have a conversation. So here's the thing. Moms give pretty good advice. And my mom, she loved me a whole lot, and she gave me a lot of advice. Some of it was good, and some of it I question at times. Like, for instance, the time that I tried to jump my BMX bike over the top of a barbed wire fence. That was good. Didn't make it. Slashed my shoulder open. Went home and, went inside, said, Mom, I'm crying, and life's terrible and everything like that. I said, Mom, look at this. I got blood out of the back of my T-shirt. She said, just rub it. How many of you moms, you give your kids advice when they hurt themselves? It's just rub it. Yeah, great advice, Mom. Appreciate that. That was really, really helpful. Then there was the time that I fell off the back of a horse into a cactus. True story. Basically dislocated my shoulder. And then I was like, Mom, it hurts when I do this. She's like, don't do that. I'll give her some. She did, actually, she took me to the hospital after she said, don't do that. She's given me some good stuff along the way. Then one that my mom used to always say to me, I've never completely understood, is she used to just look at me every once in a while and just say, you make me tired. I have no idea why. I have no why. And then this one, I'm not going to lie to you, this one hurts me a little bit. It causes a little bit of PTSD. Occasionally she'd be like, sweetheart, come here. And I'll be like, what? And she said, why don't you just go out in the street right now and go count mufflers? That is not a joke. She used to say that to me. She's a mean woman. She really did. I'm not lying. And the whole thing is Gwen down here laughing because she knows that she spends time with me. She knows it's true. Gwen now tells me, why don't you go lay out in the street and count mufflers? I got some good advice along the way. One of the ones that my mom used to always say a whole lot, though, was sit still. Anybody ever get that one? Just sit still. And little did I know how important advice that would be, because it was advice I never listened to. I never listened to it when my mom would tell me to sit still. I was always on the move. I was always on the go. I was always trying to figure out how I was going to conquer the world tomorrow. Always with some brand new scheme. Always with, something to accomplish, some goal to achieve. And my mom would just kind of look at me and say, hey, just sit still. God has blessed me with a middle child that's exactly like I was growing up. On steroids. He's the type of kid that if you go to Six Flags and you get on one roller coaster, you go and you get on the Joker. And we're sitting there, we're getting ready to take off, and he said, Dad, I can't wait to go to Superman. It's like, we haven't even rode the Joker yet. Just calm down. Just sit still. Just enjoy the moment, right? I never, ever did. I didn't realize what kind of crazy important advice that would be until I was forced to sit still this last year. 28 days in rehab. That's called sitting still. I never had sat still until that moment. In fact, I didn't realize how much movement there was in my life all the time, constantly going, constantly trying to make something happen. Until about 2 days into my rehab experience, I had walked in one morning to group counseling time. It was a 2-hour block every single day where you sat down with other folks with your same and similar type of issues, and you just kind of talk through it. In the beginning, that's not so much fun. Because, doggone it, shouldn't we be doing something? Shouldn't I have just come in here, you told me exactly what to do, and then I go do it? But no, we would just have to sit there. And the worst part about group counseling time is when we walked in, we would sit down, and the counselor, she would have this like quiet meditative music going on. It was going to be one of those touchy-feely experiences. And we would walk in and we would sit down in these chairs, and she would just say, just be quiet for a minute and relax. I'm sitting there like this. Is it over yet? No, John, it's only been 5 seconds. And I'd just be sitting there, just moving, just going. About 2 weeks into this thing, the quiet time is over. My counselor stops the music. She looks across the room straight at me. And she says, John, I'm proud of you. And I was like, what are you talking about? She says, this is the first day that you've come in here and you've just sat still. I said, do what? She said, you were still. I said, whoa. I didn't realize that all of my movement was that noticeable. But she did. I didn't recognize that thing that my mom had been telling me my entire life was something that God tells us in Psalms chapter 46, verse 10. I didn't realize how important it was to just be still and know that I am God. I wonder, as we get ready to approach 2018, I wonder how many of us have be still as one of our New Year's resolutions. I'll bet as we think about our New Year's resolutions, there's a whole lot of doing that's involved. There's either a whole lot of doing or there's a whole lot of quit doing, isn't there? I mean, we either want to get in shape and we want to stop eating those donuts. This is the year where we are going to begin to quit spending so much and start to save. I mean, there's a whole lot of doing or quit doing, but there's not a whole lot of focus oftentimes in our lives of just taking the time, like it says in Psalms, to just be still and know that I am God. It reminds me of this guy in Scripture, and he had quite the resume. His title was Prophet of God. That's a pretty good title if you can get it, right? His title is Prophet of God. Now, he wasn't really working in all of the best climates if you were going to be a prophet of God, you see, because he was the prophet of God to a nation that had originally been walking with God but had turned their backs on him. And it was his job to go and to declare the truth to this nation, a nation that did not want to hear of what it was that he had to share. But he did it anyways, and as a result, he was able to build quite an extensive resume. I mean, his resume included the fact that at one point he went to see this widowed lady who didn't have a whole lot of food. He looked at her and said, hey, cook me something. She said, I don't have a whole lot left. He said, don't worry about it. Cook for me anyway. And I guarantee you, if you do it, you'll have plenty left. Sure enough, turns out to be true. The food just kept coming. And she never went hungry. A little bit later on, as this prophet of God decides to live with this widow lady, he comes along one day and her son has gotten sick and is basically has approached death, is almost dead and dies. And he says, hey, how about if I just go pray for him and you stay down here for a little while? He goes up and he prays, and her son comes back to life. That's pretty good resume, don't you think? That's some pretty good doing when it's all said and done. He was able to look at the skies and say, hey, stop raining. And so it did. And then there was even this one time when he had basically all that he could stand. And he said, here's what I want you to do. He said, I'm the only prophet of the true and living God. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go get all of the other prophets. I want you to get all the prophets of Baal, and I want you to get all the prophets of Asherah, and I want to have a meeting. And we're going to find out once and for all who the real God is. And so he meets them there on the mountainside with all of the nation watching. And he says, you guys do me a favor. You start your sacrifices and burn up your sacrifice. And then we're going to call down. You can call down to your gods and see if the water and call water from heaven and put out the sacrifice. And then I will do the same, and whichever God answers, that way people will know who the real God is. I mean, that's pretty gutsy, don't you think? Let me prove to who God is by the fact he's going to call down water when it hasn't rained in some time. And sure enough, the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah, they set up their idol. They made their sacrifice, they lit that sucker on fire, and they began to pray, and they began to dance, and they began to do everything that they possibly could to beg their God to step in for them. And it never happened. It just burned up. And the prophet stood over, and he made fun of them over and over again. My favorite part of this, and it's actually in there if you go read it in 1 Kings chapter 18, it's actually in there. My favorite part is when the prophet of God looks at all of the prophets of Baal and says, where is your God? I guess maybe he stepped out to go to the restroom. And so then he waits until it's time for the sacrifice. And he lights the sacrifice on fire, and he begins to pray, and water falls. The fire comes and dries up the water that has been placed around. And can I just go ahead and tell you that on that day, he was able to declare victory. He's able to say, hey, look at my God. Take note of my God. He is the real one. And then he takes all of the prophets of Baal down to the river and has them killed. This is it. Victory. He's done everything that he can do, right? And then we find him in 1 Kings chapter 19. We find him in 1 Kings chapter 19. The news gets back to Jezebel about what it is that he has gone and he has done. And she says, I will guarantee that he will be dead. The prophet Elijah will be dead by morning if I have anything to do with this. And Elijah, after all of this incredible miracle, after all these incredible things that he has done, we find him in 1 Kings chapter 19, scared to death. Look what it says. Beginning in verse 9. And there he came to a cave after he had ran. But he's done all the right things throughout his life, hasn't he? He's been moving, he's been active, he's been making things happen for God even, right? And there he came to a cave and he spent the night. But the Lord said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah replied, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. Do you guys ever look at life and just say, hey, I feel like I'm trying to do all of the right things, but it doesn't seem like it's going the way that I want it to go. I mean, I'm trying to work hard. I'm trying to provide for my family. I'm trying to get the best grades in school. I'm doing my best to love in this relationship. I'm trying, I'm working, I'm doing a lot. I'm going to church on New Year's Eve. Think about what everybody else is doing on New Year's Eve. Not me, I'm with the church. How often do we kind of bring our resume to the Lord, huh? We say, God, check out everything that I'm doing. Check out, why isn't it going the way that I want to go? How can I be doing all these things and still not achieving love and joy and peace? How is that possible? He said, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you. They've torn down your altars and killed every one of your prophets, and I'm the only one left. Woe is me. I'm all by myself. And now they are trying to kill me too. And the Lord told him, go out and stand before me on the mountain. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. And it was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire. Now, if you're Elijah, what are you feeling at this point? I mean, God is showing himself to be incredibly active right now, isn't he? I mean, we've got wind and we've got earthquake and now we've got fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in cloak, and he went out, and he stood at the entrance of the cave. Folks, Elijah had spent his entire life in crazy activity for God, trying to do the right thing, trying to fix it all, trying to make it happen, because that's what good Americans do, right? We make it happen. We pull ourselves up by the bootstrap. Nobody can keep us down. That's what it's all about. Working hard and getting it done. That's what Elijah had done his entire life. And now he finds himself resentful and he finds himself afraid. And I got to tell you what, those are the two most powerful emotions that the enemy can put in your life: resentment and fear. He finds himself both of those ways, asking God, God, how could I have been doing this all this time and I still am not experiencing love and joy and peace? I'm still not experiencing what it is that I really want to be able to experience. And I got to tell you something, in churches all across America this morning, there are people that are sitting out there and they're saying, I'm doing everything right, I'm trying hard, I'm working hard, I'm reading my Bible every day, I'm here, aren't I, God? But they're still sitting out there with resentment and fear and asking God, God, where are you? Why won't you do anything? God comes along and he becomes incredibly active with this fire, with this earthquake, with this wind. But God was not inside of any of that activity. He was sending Elijah a clear message. Elijah, stop doing so much. Stop thinking that you're going to find what you're looking for inside of the doing. Be still and know that I am God. You see, all of our activity fools us into believing that we're in control. doesn't it? When we make that to-do list, what we're really saying is, hey, listen, I can control this thing. When we sit down to create that plan, and this year in 2018, here's how I'm going to get my spouse to change. We start to believe in some way, shape, or form that we're in control. And God looks at us and says, hey, I just want you to sit there. I want you to be still, and I want you to know that I am God, that I'm the one that's in charge, that I'm the one that is in control. You can't do anything about your financial situation. That makes you feel good, doesn't it? Oh, you say, yeah, I can. I can work hard and I can save, and listen to me. All those things are good, and you should. But when it's all said and done, you can be as rich as you possibly want to be. And he can take it away just like that. Ask Job. There was a gentleman in the last church that I pastored, and I loved him. I mean, he had such an incredible heart. But I got to tell you what, man, this guy was stingy when it came to money. And it just so happened in my particular situation, he was my head deacon. And he had worked hard his entire life and had saved a whole lot of money, had everything that he could possibly pack away into his retirement. And then, in a moment's notice, the company ceased to exist. And so did all of that retirement. And it was interesting because as the head deacon of our church, he just lived in this constant state of fear that all of the money was going to go away. So much so that I'll never forget, on one of my first Sundays there, we were looking down into the baptistry, and as we were looking down in there, it was all rusty and crusted, and it hadn't been used in years, literally. And I was looking down in there because I was talking with a couple of guys about how we needed to get that thing fixed, and we needed to get it up and running. Imagine that. A church using its baptismal area. And I said, and then I looked and I said, isn't it going to be amazing when we are baptizing people every single week? Trying to cast some vision, trying to get some folks excited. And he's standing right there and he said, Pastor, when we baptize, we try to do that no more than kind of once a quarter, or maybe, even once every 6 months or so. I said, why? He said, well, because of the water bill. I said, did it ever occur to you if we're baptizing every week that money is not an issue? That there's people here that are giving and lives are being changed? But he was worried about the water bill. He thought he could control the church's financial situation. We'll just keep saving more. We'll keep putting more away. We don't need to go use that money to reach people for Jesus, because somehow he thought he could create his own safety. We look at that story and say, hey, that's a terrible story, but don't we do the same thing, right? I mean, when I get this much, then I'll start giving. God, we just stay constantly involved in activity and trying to do more and more and more, and believe, and all we're doing is teaching ourselves that we're in control. Elijah's learning an important lesson. He's learning that he's not in control. In fact, what Elijah shows me in this particular situation is he probably didn't listen to his mom real well. She probably used to tell him to sit still too. You know what else I think probably Elijah probably should have listened to his mom a lot, and my mom used to tell me this too. She used to say, John, don't sit so close to the TV. How many of you ever heard that one, right? Don't sit so close to the TV, because you'll be like right up on it. So I used to hear it all the time, and here's the reality. When you're up so close to the TV, you don't have perspective, do you? I mean, you can't really be able to see what's really happening. And most of us, this is how we spend our lives. We spend our lives so actively doing that all we're doing is kind of like running from one TV set in our minds to the next one. We're running, and for just a few minutes, we wake up in the morning, and whatever it is that we've got to do that day that's got to be so important, that's the first thing that we begin to think about, right? In fact, it might have been worry or stress that even woke us up in the middle of the night, and immediately our minds go to that thing that we're the most worried about. Maybe it's some type of financial security situation that you find yourself in, and you just got your face just pressed right up against that thought in your mind. And then, you kind of think through it. You think maybe you solved it, and you start to feel just a little bit at peace because that thought has gone away, and then all of a sudden the next thought creeps up, right? And what do? You run straight from that thought to the next thought, and you've got your face like right up in it. And now you're not thinking about the financial security situation, but now you're thinking about that family relationship that there's a problem in. And you're thinking about that, and you're scheming, and you're trying to figure out how to make it work and how to change this person. And then you start to kind of formulate a plan there, and you think, okay, at least in the next conversation, this is what I'll say to them, and maybe that'll help this. I mean, I've tried everything else before, but maybe that'll help. And then you start to feel just a little bit of peace about that, but then you start thinking about that issue that you've got going on at work. And so you run straight from this thought, right? You run straight from this thought, and you press your face right up here against the TV, and you start having the next thought. This problem, this thing that you've got to try to achieve or take care of at work. And our life is just this series from the moment that we get up in the morning, right? From the moment that we get up in the morning, it's running from thought to thought to thought to thought, with our faces pressed right up against every single one of them. Planning and scheming and trying to figure it out. And every time we start to get just a little bit of peace, we run to the next thought. And all that anxiety and all that stress, it just ramps itself back up again. You know what we've got to be able to do? We've got to be able to step back. Not put our faces so close to the TV. We got to take a moment to just be still. To just be still. And know that He is God. To just sit down. And to just be quiet. 28 days in rehab will make you think about a lot about your life. By the way, that's what it's designed to do. That's why one of the things that I say oftentimes to people now is that I think everybody should spend 28 days in rehab. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want you to become an addict to go do it, okay? But 28 days just to be quiet. Forced quiet. Forced stillness. Just to be quiet. Just to listen. Just to sit still. And if I could go back and I could tell myself to listen to any of my mom's advice growing up, the thing that I would go back. And if you ever have those, in fact, maybe you're thinking about that right now as you're getting ready to enter into 2018. What would I have done different? What would I have done different? Some of us were looking at our entire lives right now, and we're thinking to ourselves, what would I have done different? If I could go back and give myself any piece of advice or listen to any piece of advice that I was given, what advice would I give, or what advice would I have listened to that I would have done different? The one thing that I would do different is I would look at myself and say, listen to Mom, sit still. And now I can say that stillness has become a part of my daily routine. From the moment that I get up in the morning, I have to get up a little bit earlier now to do that. But I get up a little bit earlier in the morning so that I can have some stillness. I get up and I go and I get a cup of coffee, and I walk into my little office area there at the house, and I sit down and, kind of wrap myself up in a blanket with my cup of coffee, and I sit still for about the next hour. I never used to do that. Say, didn't you have a devotion time? Oh, absolutely. I read through my devotional plan for the day. And then my prayer time would be putting on my walking shoes and going for a 3-mile walk, which occurred to me later on that even that's still activity. That's not sitting still. I couldn't even be still in my prayer time, folks. But now I just sit there. I just sit there and I read a little bit of God's word and I meditate. And I spend a little bit of time talking to him. And most of all, I just sit there. Completely still. And when stuff starts to come up and all those thoughts start to happen, I just like say, not right now. That's not what matters right now. No, I'm just going to go back to just sitting there. So what do you think about? Nothing. Just stillness. And knowing that he is God. Nothing more, nothing less has to be discovered on our daily journey. Nothing has to be done. Nothing has to be achieved. The only thing that has to transpire is being still and knowing that he is God. I do it every day. I also find other times when I can just go and do it and be still. Maybe being still in different places. A couple, back in October, my family and I, we love to go in the outdoors, and so we went up to Patapsco State Park, and I found this spot, the Cascade Falls. Now, the funniest part of it is if you read the sign at the bottom of the trail, it says Cascade Falls, and you're thinking, man, Niagara must be up there. Nope, it's just that. Just a little bit of water just running off the rocks into this nice little steady pool. We went up there and you know, I got two boys and a little girl, and they're running around being kids, having a good time, and people are walking up and down the trail and enjoying life. And I just sat down on a rock, and I took this picture, and then I just sat there. I just sat still. And I just kind of tried to listen. Man, there was still all kinds of crazy activity that was going on around me, but I just focused in, quiet. Said, hey, God, listen, whatever it is you want to tell me. And I noticed that as I was sitting there, there were times when kids would jump into that water. And, anytime you jump into a still pool, the mud would like kind of kick itself up and kind of dirty the water for a bit. But then I would notice that as that pool just sat there, as still as it could be, even though it was moved upon by outside forces at times, as long as that water from the top of that rock continued to flow into that pool, eventually that pool all that dirt would flow away also. And it would become still and clean again. And then something else would happen, right? A storm could come, anything could transpire, and it might shake the pool up for a little while and create some of the dirt and create some of the stuff that wouldn't make you want to drink from it. But then, if the pool just stays there, if it just sits still and that water continues to flow into it, eventually all of that dirt will leave again, and it'll be a nice place. And I couldn't help but think of myself, John, that's really all I have to do in life, is I just have to be that pool. I just got to sit still. Because if I'll just sit still, then God's love will just continue to flow into my life. And as God's love continues to flow, all of the dirt will flow out. All of that dark energy will go away. The only thing I have to do is just sit still. And as awkward and as crazy as it might be in your hectic life, the only thing you have to do in 2018 is just sit still and know that he is God.